guys! Hey guys, how are we doing? Back on another video from Any News, continuing with the cut content videos for Season 4 of Overlord. We're going to check out Episode 9, like what was changed, what differences there were. I love this, and I'm loving this current season as well.
One of the most important things that you need to know about Ainz is that everything he does is all for the direct benefit of Nazareth.
Yep.
I know sometimes...
Does not care about anybody else.
But even
We're doing
now,
fabulous.
annihilating an entire country, all those innocent deaths are something he's planning to profit from. So, as we go through the cut content for this setup of an episode, you'll slowly come to realize why Ainz is doing what he's doing here. I promise it's not just killing for the sake of killing. There is a reason for Ainz's warpath. Episode 48.
Episode 48.
Countdown to Extinction. Covering Chapter 2 from Volume 14 of the light novel. With the kingdom right on the cusp of war, Zenek was worried his father wouldn't be able to make the best decision here. You see, ever since his closest friend was lost in battle, the king's physical well-being was clearly starting to deteriorate. He was rapidly aging in a manner that left him as only skin and bones. So, considering this sudden lack of vitality, Zenek feared his father wouldn't be in the right state of mind to handle this.
I felt like Zenek really stepped up, man, like in the episode after this, isn't it?
Especially when the king started protecting Philip on the basis that he could be innocent. Since many were convinced
he's an idiot.
was set up by the Sorcerer Kingdom, King Ramposa was adamant about not setting up this risky precedent. You see, for every time a plot was carried out by their undead neighbors, the king didn't want to have to start sacrificing innocents just to appease them.
Fair enough.
It was an unsustainable method of handling conflict that was just plain barbaric. That being the case, Zenek was sure his father was failing to see the bigger picture here. That with his absolute refusal to become a vassal state either, Zenek knew he'd have his work cut out for him. What he did value from his father's conviction, though, was the respect he commanded from the people he disagreed with. Despite not always seeing eye to eye with the council next to him, each and every minister admired his benevolent nature and extremely high regard. As a king who attracted people who were much better than himself, Zenek was hoping
he was so epic.
take advantage of that in the future. The thing is, with the king now making decisions that could destroy their very nation, the inevitable plot Zenek would have to use to remove him from power would undoubtedly sever all ties with the people he was hoping to rely on. Then, with his sister being sent off to some remote manor to live with Klein, when the time did come for Zenek to take his rule, he would neither have his father's magnetism nor his sister's wisdom, both of which were key assets he was hoping to use to make lasting change. So, while Zenek did consider himself to be a superior king to his brother Barbara, he wasn't so sure that he could do much better anymore. The tools he needed to do so were all but gone now.
Yeah, everything he needs falling away from him.
The final act that showed Zenek his father was unfit was the lack of reasoning as to why Philip's head shouldn't be used as a bargaining chip. Like, even if he was innocent and it was all just a ploy, the life of one noble certainly wasn't worth more than the life of everyone else.
Everybody.
But with his father showing zero leeway when it came to this topic, Zenek knew the only way to get past his objections was to usurp him. He was so close to gaining the throne legitimately, yet the very last step of the way required him to take it by force. If he didn't, then it was very likely there wouldn't be any kingdom left.
It totally took me by surprise that he just went out there and led that army, man.
Considered which ministers and which soldiers to get on his side. That's when the messenger entered with news of Albedo's arrival, leading us to the following meeting with the Sorcerer Kingdom's envoy. Normally, the king wouldn't ever meet an envoy on the same day of their arrival, but considering the severity of the situation,
yeah, gotta get this sorted.
Now, the first thing to note about her arrival was the dark pink gown that she was supposed to be wearing here. It was an outfit so out of place for the discussion
that looks cool.
We had, yet no one in the room could doubt it was worn intentionally. As for what signal this dress was supposed to send,
okay.
Well, that was a message that would be found out shortly. When the king offered his life as an apology next, Zenek was by far the most shocked out of
that face, man.
Not
Like,
because of the
what?
wild offer his father had just made, but instead because of the realization that this was his plan all along.
He was planning on doing this from the beginning.
The needs of his kingdom first, that also included situations like these. Situations where the only hope for resolution was the highest level of sincerity offered by the reigning monarch themselves. So, for any normal nation receiving it, an apology like this, along with the head of the king, would undoubtedly be more than enough to settle any matter. If they were to demand more than that, then every other nation on the continent would only ridicule them. But because the nation they were dealing with was the Sorcerer Kingdom, one measly life wasn't enough to appease them.
No.
The very notion was enough to cause Albedo to cease all formalities with them. The king didn't realize it until partway through, but the moment he did was the moment he started seeing reality for what it really was. This wasn't a political envoy that he was dealing with, but instead a demon talking down to a human. It didn't matter at all that he was a king, because to her a human was just a human.
Humans are lower
He
than
was
them, yeah.
absolutely nothing that deserved a level of respect befitting of that. None. So, once Ramposa saw his situation was futile, the thought did cross his mind to kill this envoy, but an act like that would
Oh, no, that would have been something. You would have been screwed there, man.
That meant no country
I bet it would have just slaughtered them all, man.
What they could do instead, though, was send word to every other nation of the apology they tried to offer. Perhaps by letting them know that the king's head wasn't enough, the other nations would start to see just how uncooperative their enemy was.
Maybe. That's an interesting one. Look, we tried, guys, look.
Ramposa did tell Renner and Zenek to run away, but both were well aware that there wasn't anywhere to go. So long as either of them were still alive, the kingdom would continue to live through their bloodline. A notion both were sure the Sorcerer Kingdom wouldn't allow to happen.
Yeah.
So, as they both agreed to stay at their father's side, Renner's emotionless face made her seem resolute, while Zenek wasn't so sure that he'd be able to stay unwavering like that. Emotions during a time like this were quite unpredictable. Fast forward now to a month into the war, and the meeting we see.
Oh, so it does just skip a month, because I remember watching the episode and thinking, like, wow, how much have they missed there? So it does literally skip. Fair.
Comprehensive to him, the topic of war was something that he could actually follow. That didn't mean that he had given up on any of the other briefs, but since this was one that he thoroughly understood, for once Ainz knew he could at least try to meet the standard his guardians had set out for him. When it came to any of the other fields, though, Ainz was actually trying to make himself better at them. He definitely would have preferred to just hand it off to Albedo, but with every guardian always harping on every little word he says, it was only a matter of time until he'd say something which would lead Nazarick towards some incalculable losses. So, the best way to prevent that from ever happening was to eliminate the problem right at the source. And that meant making himself a better person.
Right.
If the Guardians were always going to seek Ainz's opinion, then Ainz needed to make sure that his opinion was the right one. Thus, the reason he was reading all these self-help and business
Oh, wow, okay.
was the least he could do to mitigate the risk that was himself.
That's interesting.
Now, while Ainz
We don't get any explanation of that whatsoever in the anime, yeah.
There wasn't much said about Confucius' part.
I'm sorry, I'm very phlegmy today.
As the person in charge of enacting the actual conquest, he was the one who made sure the cities were annihilated to completion. A task that required 0 survivors. Without that strict policy of sparing no one, it was much less likely that they would have been able to...
I really liked the fight between the two Death Knights that he sends in with the undead. And those adventurers, that was cool.
Confucius had successfully made ruin of each and every city that he visited. He had even gone so far as to wipe one out by himself.
Damn.
Of course, given that the person behind him right now was Pistonia, Ainz didn't really feel all that comfortable talking about it. He could only imagine the glare that she was giving him for causing so much death. That said, though, because this killing did have an actual purpose to it, Ainz was hoping that she could at least understand why it was necessary. It's not like he gained some sick, twisted pleasure from doing it, but he had no problems killing if it meant it would make Nazarick better.
That was brutal.
Remember,
that was season 1,
so
wasn't it?
long as it was for the direct benefit of Nazarick, there was no limit to the number of people Ainz would kill for it. As for what all this death meant for them here, then, well, that ties into Ainz's discussion about failure. If all the lives lost were going to be worth it, then at least one of his city conquests needed to end with failure.
Mate, when that guy turns up, oh, that was so sick.
So long as one of them didn't succeed, the experience gained from it would be invaluable. So, out of all the things that Ainz had hoped for in this war, the thing he wanted most right now was defeat. For a bit more context as to why, well, because not everyone can be like Touch Me and pursue growth even after winning. Sometimes what someone needs to realize their shortcomings is a solid blow which helps to highlight them. From Ainz's past experience with this guild, failure was an essential encounter which would make Nazarick all the better for him. His invasions of enemy strongholds and numerous campaigns of conquest undoubtedly gave him the experience needed to handle situations like this. So, in hopes of spreading that experience across Nazarick, Ainz wanted his guardians to experiment with conquests of their own.
Okay.
Not only was that sure to be useful later on, but it was all to better prepare them for their inevitable face-off against another guild. Of course, nothing had...
I hope that's something that's coming.
...existed, but if there was one thing that Ainz was absolutely certain about, it was that eventually there would come a time where he and Nazarick would have to face off against another guild. It may not happen anytime soon, but to assume
It
Ainz
will
Ulko
come.
was
I
the
hope
only
so.
guild in the New World was the epitome of foolishness that would certainly lead to their demise. So, in order to get his people ready for that eventuality, experience was the cornerstone that would guide them through it. It was especially helpful since none of the Guardians could get any stronger than their level 100 builds allowed them to. That being the case, Ainz thought it best to work on the only thing that they could improve upon. Then, by having these conquests recorded and distributed throughout Nazarick, the history Demiurge and the others were about to make would serve as the basis for the weaker denizens to learn from. They may be too weak to risk having on the front lines right now, but perhaps in time minions like the Domain Guardians would be able to take part too.
Maybe.
I mean, it was only a matter of time until Ainz would be forced to rely on them. So, to ensure every Floor Guardian had the same opportunity to learn as Concutus, they were each assigned several conquests in which the goal was to plan them differently. No two cities could be approached with the same invasion plan that someone else had.
Different tactics,
and
different
neither
people. Right,
Albedo
cool.
nor Demiurge were allowed to take part in this either. That being the case, there was quite the interesting stratagems that some of the Guardians had come up with. More specifically, the one Shaltir recommended was actually quite hilarious. As the person in charge of freight transport with the dragons, it was only natural for her conquest to involve them as well. Her idea was to have the frost dragons carry soul eaters, then have them be dropped from 500 yards
Wow.
into the air.
Cool.
Then, by having the soul eaters immediately activate their auras upon landing, any damage taken from the fall itself would quickly be healed through the souls that they were harvesting. So, when you really think about how this plan operated,
Jesus.
the whole thing was basically an aerial bombardment of life-stealing predator missiles.
Yeah.
Of course, when this plan was implemented for real, a whole slew of issues made the outcome extremely laughable. Not because the idea itself was stupid, but simply because what had happened was actually quite comedic. You see, with many of the Soul Eaters falling on rooftops, the resulting impact they made had led them to bounce in each and every direction. They would either land straight through the roof and make a dramatic entrance, or end up bouncing into a spot that they couldn't recover from.
Oh, wow.
So, with an incident rate like that,
Jesus.
a few more experiments were needed before this plan could be deemed a success. It did, however, pave the path towards a potential airborne division. As for some of the
Which is
other
pretty
plans,
sick.
there was an interesting one that had 300 Elder Liches carpet bomb with fireball, then a more covert one that involved the assassination of city leaders. Regardless of what the Floor Guardians did come up with, though, the varied approaches to conquests were sure to be educational for everyone.
Definitely. I like that. So they have to learn, they have to try different stuff so that they can
Despite the whole
grow.
encounter being something
That's awesome.
Ainz didn't really want to do, putting it off would only lead to bigger problems.
Oh, Albedo's sister.
To him, this was similar to a separate department wanting to have a face-to-face meeting with him. It didn't happen very often, but when it did, it was sure to invite only trouble. Considering this wasn't something that he could put off, though, Ainz dismissed his maid and the 8-edged assassins, then proceeded to the Frost prison where he could begin this meeting privately. The maid did try to insist on coming along, but Ainz couldn't risk having this meeting cause trouble in the future. Even with the maid promising not to see or hear anything, the slightest chance of word getting out was something he wanted to avoid.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Now, the first thing to note about Nigredo is that her apparent affection for any type of baby was nothing more than a superficial facade dictated by her flavor text. Yes, she did have an immense soft spot for infants, but the moment those infants turned the age of 2, her love for them became practically non-existent.
Wow.
I believe the exact word they used
Her
was
love died.
Ainz didn't explain exactly what that meant, but this severe change in attitude was enough to have any children over the age of 2 taken away from her. Like, all the ones who were saved during Yaldabaoth's invasion in Season 2 were transferred to Bastonia the moment they hit that age threshold.
Right.
As Ainz himself had put it, to keep them with Nigredo would just result in her having more meat to process. Now, with regards to Bastonia's plea for mercy, there were quite a few factors that made making a decision extremely difficult. You see, while Bastonia did provide valid reason to let more refugees go, the main problem lay with how other Guardians would perceive it. It wasn't so much an issue for Ainz himself, but by proceeding with a plan that Albedo and Demiurge had already discarded, their reaction to it would definitely become the main cause for concern here. Despite Ainz having already warned them that he would intentionally make mistakes, should this plan cause the overall one to fail completely,
Well,
then there was no
just
way
told
he
loads of
himself
different books
could
and stuff,
fix
so
the
cool.
problem. Ainz only wanted to take risks that he could manage himself. So, if this plan would lead to issues that he couldn't resolve on his own, then following through with it could potentially lead to losses that they couldn't recover from. And that was the main thing that Ainz wanted to avoid here. Then, to make things worse, because Bastonia and Nigredo had already failed once before, should their plan happen to lead to it once again, then Albedo was sure to insist on their execution even more than last.
Ooh, her
The
costume's
gap
so cool.
between them and the rest of Nazarick would widen beyond the point of repair. So, when considering all these risks, the most logical solution was to just reject it. The thing is, because there wasn't any significant flaw in the plan Pistonia had mentioned, Ainz couldn't simply dismiss it on the basis that it could fail. He also wouldn't get away with just saying that they were planning to kill only 90% of the population. Not only was that far too flimsy of an excuse, but to reject a plan like this would further discourage valuable minority opinions such as this one. Since Nazarick was planning to incorporate people from the outside world, there would definitely come a time when more opinions like this would arise.
Yeah, he's got to
So, by having
understand
this
that the other people need to have a say at some point.
The experience gained from it was sure to be helpful in the future. Perhaps he could even put them in charge of managing that new aspect of Nazarick. But yeah, that's pretty much everything.
Oh no, what about the fight?
Coast City. Instead of covering that now though, I'm gonna try to include that and the other adventurer stuff in the next
Okay.
video. Until
Fine.
then though, as always, thank you so much for watching.
No.
If you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time.
Ciao. Man, I was really hoping he was going to go into like that guy in the red suit with the machine gun and the fight and the power-ups and everything, and that was cool. But that was still interesting to see all the other stuff that was missed out, and all the stuff about Ainz, man. Just reading those self-help books, it makes sense, but it's like don't get any mention of that whatsoever in the anime. That's mental. Anyway, thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video, I upload links in the description to the Patreon page. $1 a month will allow us to support the channel. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you guys very much for that, and thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments down below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos, and I'll see you guys next time.